Hi, I'll continue with paragraph 17 of the chapter on the brace from Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach's Versuch über die wahre Art, das Klavier zu spielen. Da man außer dem Klavier das Zeichen des Doppelschlags ebenso wenig kennet, als nötig diese Manier in der Musik ist, so deutet man sie durch das gewöhnliche Zeichen des Trillers oder wohl gar durch das Zeichen des Mordenten, welches manchmal einen Triller vorstellen soll, an. Bei Figur 58 finden sich ein Haufen Exempel, bei welchen allen der Doppelschlag besser und bequemer ist als der Triller. Die mit einem Stern bezeichneten enthalten den eigentlichen Sitz eines Doppelschlages, weil allda keine andere Manier statt hat. Die mit 1, 2, 3 und 4 bezeichneten Figuren, wobei aber die letzte Note allezeit die wiederholte mittelste sein muss, sind ebenso gewiss ein Sitz eines Trillers als eines Doppelschlags bei geschwindem Tempo. Bei dem Exempel X wird zuweilen in langsamer Zeitmaß nach dem Doppelschlage noch ein Vorschlag an dieselbe Note gehängt. When comparing the examples of figure 58 from this paragraph 17 to paragraph 20 from the chapter on Trills and its figure 31, to which Bach says, among the mistakes of which trills are the innocent cause, to begin with we discover this, in that many will burden the first of those notes shown at figure 31 with a trill, regardless that the slurs or bows generally placed over these passages should prevent this. So comparing the figures of paragraph 17 to that and to paragraph 16's figure 57 from the chapter on the brace, where Bach says, appoggiaturas which don't repeat the preceding note do not suffer a brace over them, figure 57. Whereas 57a will go. So in the first example of figure 57 from paragraph 16, according to Bach, the D, the appoggiatura at the start of the slur, doesn't cater for a brace, whereas the second note, the C in A, which the C would be the Abzug, and that's the second note of the slur, that does cater for a brace, or will suffer a brace. And according to paragraph 20 from the chapter on Trills, the slurs or the bows in figure 31 should be hindering the addition of a trill to those Cs, which are likewise at the beginning of each slur. So in those two examples, the note at the beginning of each slur doesn't suffer. In the first case a trill, in the second case a brace. Comparing those two figures, 31 and 57, to the examples of figure 58 with regard to the slurs, in looking to maybe notice or establish a pattern of the first note of the slur not getting a decoration, one finds in the examples of figure 58 a break in that pattern. So figure 58 prevents us from being able to say the first note of a slur doesn't get a decoration. The first example is one of those marked with an asterisk, that Bach says contain the actual seat of a brace, where in all those same places no other ornament works. It is only at the end will we be truly able to test that assertion. So for now we are going to have to take Bach at his word. So Bach says the brace is the only ornament that will work in that situation in this first example. The brace comes in at the second note of the slur. So if one had, let's say, a vested interest in that pattern working out, saw opportunity for themselves in it, their excitement would be growing now, because they could think of maybe breaking that rule or observation that the first note of the slur doesn't get a decoration. As well, from paragraph 6, where Bach informs us of where the brace will be found, specifically over a repeated note or over the following note after this repeated note when it isn't repeated anew. And that following note may move stepwise or leap, and that was figure 51L. You can see the same criteria fulfilled in this first example of figure 58. The C following the repeated E is leaping and is not itself repeated, plus the slurring is the same. The second would be an example where the brace, because of the speed, is more comfortable than the trill. After each brace is a directly ensuing rising or ascending second, a steigende Sekunde. The third can be compared to figure 31 from paragraph 20 from the chapter on trills, where the bow should be preventing the adding of a trill. Here the trill sign is over the first note of the slur, so the pattern is broken. Here the person with the vested interest would have to be ready to let go of his theory as a false god. Or, if he doesn't want to let it go, he'd have to start manipulating or eradicating the evidence against it in order to push it through anyway. This, as well, can be considered next to what Bach said in paragraph 16. We can see that if that B in the second bar is an appoggiatura, and in paragraph 15, Bach said, the brace over an appoggiatura, because the repeated notes in the previous paragraph are practically always appoggiaturas. So if that B in the second bar is an appoggiatura, it is an appoggiatura that is repeating the preceding note, as would be those in the next three figures. This will further solidify paragraph 16. These are the factors that come into play when trying to figure out the right answer, the ones that are non-existent in the cage. So the factors that come into play when trying to figure out the answer, those factors do not exist in the cage. The fourth can as well be considered with the bow or the slur mark, and that it breaks the pattern of the first note of the slur theory. Again, the braces are followed by ascending seconds. In the fifth example, the brace is followed by a falling second. One can see that the pearl trill won't go since the note over which the trill sign has been placed is not a falling second. And you can see how Bear and Wright are just, they'd better off just shutting up and not confusing things. What Bach presents these as are instances where the brace is better and more comfortable than the trill. Bei Figur 58 finden sich ein Haufen Exempel, bei welchen allem der Doppelschlag besser und bequemer ist als der Triller. He is not comparing the brace to all ornaments. So paragraph 14 and its footnote could be remembered here. Ungeachtet der Doppelschlag gerne über einer wiederholten Note angebracht wird, so verträgt ihn in diesem Falle eine darauffolgende steigende Sekunde dennoch eher als eine heruntergehende, indem der Anschlag bei diesem letzteren Falle oft wenigstens in geschwinden Noten besser tut. Figur 55. This will also give a hint as to the tempo Bach might have had in mind when including this example. One could note that there is no asterisk, meaning it does not embody the actual seat of the brace where no other ornament works. And just to recap, Bach said in this paragraph that the brace could as well be indicated by the sign of the mordent. So here in this example, mordent signs could have just as easily been used as the trill sign. So you could be looking at that example just as easily with mordent signs there instead of the trill signs, the T or dot sign. The sixth, again with the bow. Should the bow not prevent the trill? Is there no further information? What of the pattern? What of figure 31 from paragraph 20 from the chapter on trills? What of all that? Would it not make you wonder? What's the deal? The seventh is another example marked with an asterisk containing the actual seat of a brace, where no other ornament comes off. And it'll go with everything said in paragraph 11 regarding situation and performance, I'd say. Ich muss bei dieser Gelegenheit einer Ausnahme gedenken, welche sich ereignet, wenn man in langsamem Tempo wegen des Effekts sowohl bei dem Schlusse Figur 52 als auch außerdem nach einem Vorschlag von unten A statt des Trillers einen leisen Doppelschlag macht, indem man die letzte Note davon so lange unterhält, bis die folgende eintritt. One could wonder how much the pianissimo indication has to do with no other ornament working. I just throw that in there. In the 8th and 9th examples are again slurs and trill signs that break the pattern of the first note of the slur not getting a decoration. The notes are leaping in these two examples. Paragraph 13 can be remembered. Es fließt ferner aus dieser Ähnlichkeit, dass man unsere Manier ohne Bedenken über Noten, welche springen, anbringen könne. Figur 54. Wir sehen hierbei hinauf und herunterspringende Exempel. Here as well we see upward and downward leaping examples. One can see the care Bach took to reinforce all of what he says. One, two, three, and 4, where the last note must always be the repeated middle one, are just as much the place or the seat of a trill when the tempo is not so fast. When it's fast, braces are used, i.e., they go from being the seat of a trill to being the seat of a brace. As Bach says that, one can notice the absence of slurs in all 4 figures. 1 and 2 are downward leaping, and 3 and 4 are upward leaping. Each present the same 2 kinds of rhythmic figure. His word of caution about the last note always having to be the repeated middle one could be to prevent anyone running off with just the 2 types of rhythmic character of the figures in their head, which will lead to situations being misread by those people. And those people might have influence, which would make their little amounts of half-baked knowledge dangerous. So, yeah, people could just think of the bum-ba-bum or the ba-ba-bum rhythm, and whenever they see that rhythm, you know, either decide that's the place for a trill or a brace, or tell their students to put it in there. And, because they have only half the knowledge, they are sending people off in completely the wrong direction. And what do you get when you believe someone like that? You immediately become the donkey chasing the carrot. So the repeated middle note is an important detail to remember there. And you can see there's no slurs in those 4 examples. What's not written there can play just as much a role as what is written there. That is why people, the roll of honour is so lost with the scores of Mozart, because they don't understand what it means when something isn't there. These experts, give them a round of applause. Regarding the example X, Bach says sometimes in a slower tempo, another or one more appoggiatura is hung onto the same note. The note in question is the A. Why say another appoggiatura? Noch can mean still or yet or what is more, like in noch dazu. I could imagine this getting falsely interpreted, where some might claim that Bach means for the C appoggiatura to be attached to the B, since that is the note with the brace. That is the same note, dieselbe Note. And that noch in this sentence is used in the sense of still or additionally, attached to the action, i.e. what else is to be done, as opposed to the appoggiatura, where if noch were attached to the appoggiatura, it would mean another or one more appoggiatura. So people could be running off thinking they found like an anomaly, and they found the exception, and they run off with this, just like the Trills sort of stuff. People lacking reader comprehension skills, lacking insight into music, lacking the ability to observe, the ability of critical thinking, of analysis, of any of these things. And then they think they've discovered something, that there's going to make a name for them. And it probably will make a name for them. Like I can solve fingering, and it doesn't get a single bit of notice. Yet somebody can come up with crap like that, with something wrong, and it's the entire establishment, the entire classical music world embraces it. It makes me sick. These are the dark ages of classical music. Bach says another appoggiatura because the B before the A is the first appoggiatura that is hung onto the A, making the C the second. The only difference being the B is written out as a proper note and divided up in the bar. So, dieselbe Note is the A. There's 2 appoggiaturas hung onto that note. One is the B and the other is the C. And the C is not hung on to the B, despite what any roll of honour Lilliput, mediocre midget is going to tell you. This example could be thought of and used perhaps, so the example X could be thought of and used perhaps in places where the extra appoggiatura is not written in. so a performance practice not necessarily documented in the score. It satisfies the brace's want to ascend, and it evens or balances out the rhythm. So you can better arrive at the downbeat instead of the way so often happens, or you know, that after each bar the next bar is started new. You can actually arrive at the it smooths out the you know, the abruptness or the intrusion of the rhythm of the brace in that slow 3/4, and leads you better in, takes you better to that next downbeat. So you really get a sense of the 3/4, which is a very difficult time signature to do properly, and you'll hear evidence of that in all of the Roll of Honours recordings and interpretations. There was a masterclass I saw with Murray Pariah where he was going over the second movement of the Tempest Sonata, and when he demonstrated that opening, Murray Pariah, instead of playing 3 bars of 3/4, no, instead of playing 4 bars of 3/4, he played 3 bars of 4/4. So he totally unable to play 3/4, and everybody hanging off his every word. Like, what a dope. But he doesn't, you know, he's just being himself. He doesn't force everybody to swallow everything hook, line and sinker, but they do. The appoggiatura B with the brace over it is repeating the preceding note. Again, one could notice the slurring, and one could notice Bach's use here of the sign of the brace and not the sign of the trill, the T or dot sign. And here's paragraph 20 from the chapter on appoggiaturas and paragraph 21. Because they'll be relevant now. Diese Ausschmückung der Vorschläge, indem sie oft neue kleine Nütchen erfordert, ist Ursache zu anderen in der Folge erklärten Manieren, und man pflegt also in diesem Falle diese Vorschläge gerne als ordentliche Note in den Takt mit einzuteilen, C. Bei langsamen Stücken kann zuweilen der Vorschlag sowohl als der folgenden Note ausgeschmückt sein, D. Demungeachtet pflegt man die Vorschläge oft deswegen in den Takt mit einzuteilen, damit weder sie noch die folgende Note ausgeziert werden, E. One of the examples of figure 20 that Bach presented in paragraph 25 on appoggiaturas could be considered in light of the situation at X Bach is describing, and how perhaps the F appoggiatura could potentially be written out as a big note and divided up in the bar, since it has been decorated with its own appoggiatura, the D. So you could see how the, you know, given what Bach describes there in paragraph 20, how the F could be written out as a big note and divided up in the bar. Although the appoggiatura is there, so people like you, me, and Bach apparently don't ornament it. I didn't think of that. So what does that mean? Where does that leave us? That leaves us misinterpreting the text to the example X, leading to the mistake committed regarding appoggiaturas Bach talks about in paragraph 24 and 25 from the chapter on appoggiaturas. Der zweite Fehler ist, wenn man den Vorschlag von seiner folgenden Note abreißt, indem man ihn entweder nicht genugsam aushält oder wohl gar in der Einteilung der vorhergehenden Note mit anhängt. Figur 20. Aus diesem letzten Versehen sind die hässlichen Nachschläge entstanden, die sogar außerordentlich Mode sind und welche leider noch dazu nicht eher gebraucht werden, als bei den sangbarsten Gedanken. Zum Exempel B. So that's what what's gonna end up happening. That C appoggiatura will, some Lilliput expert will say how they mean that Bach means it to be hung onto the B. So what they'll be telling people to do is to hang it off onto the B, the same note, and what you get is this ugly Nachschlag or afterstroke. There's no English term for that. Of course there isn't, because why would there be in English Lilliput ignorance to music? How would they even notice the need for such words, for such terms? And here's the appendix to that paragraph 25 from the chapter on appoggiaturas. When one, at the ending, or when the melody at least doesn't ascend soon after an appoggiatura from below, before the main note enters, does another completely short appoggiatura from above, so is such to avoid. This as well can be compared to what Bach writes about X and to its situation. An appoggiatura from above versus one from below. In the appendix is another appoggiatura hung onto the same note. So there's an example of the same thing, just to support my explanation of what Bach says about that. Example X. The last sentence of that paragraph 20 and its figure 15D can be connected to paragraph 15 and figure 56 in order to broaden or hone our picture, for better context, for nuance, before any hard and fast rules are pressed upon us. The brace over an appoggiatura doesn't suffer that the following note gets a decoration, versus sometimes in slow pieces, the appoggiatura as well as the following note can be decorated. So by connecting them, we're getting a better understanding of how Bach maneuvers his way through the world of ornamentation. Der Mangel an Kennzeichen der Manieren außer unserem Instrumente nötigt also die Komponisten oft das Zeichen des Theorpunkt dahin zu setzen, wo der Triller entweder wegen der Geschwindigkeit kaum möglich oder wegen der Schleifung ungeschickt ist. Das letzte Exempel mit zweierlei Endigung unter dem Titel Recit, von denen bei der ersten die letzte Note von dem Doppelschlage nicht wie gewöhnlich unterhalten wird, um das Sprechen nachzuahmen, erfordert über der vorletzten Note in beiden Fällen ausdrücklich einen Doppelschlag. Da man nun unmöglich das Zeichen des Theorpunkt hierbei setzen kann, so muss man, wenn man kein anderes hat, diese Noten der Diskretion der Spielenden überlassen. Perhaps after comparing both figure 31 from paragraph 20 and figure 57 from paragraph 16 to the examples of figure 58 that are attached to paragraph 17, in order to try and establish a pattern, the information of the first sentence jumped out at you in a way it might not have done so otherwise. Perhaps you noticed that you had developed an appetite for it. The trill is, because of the slur, unskillful, ungeschickt, or awkward, clumsy, when it's not in other cases practically impossible because of the speed. That is relayed so quickly, yet is key to recognizing and realizing all the information presented in the previous paragraph and its significance. So it can be tied together, the information, the trill, the slur, and the brace. Bach is explaining the slurs and the trill signs. He is telling us the point of all those examples of figure 58, what they are illustrating as a collective. The also of that first sentence in paragraph 18 is in direct reference to the preceding paragraph. That sentence is paragraph 17's conclusion. We have better context to what he says in paragraph 20 from the chapter on Trills. It's not isolated information. It's like being in person with him and having a follow-up question. And here's how we might answer such follow-up questions, elaborating when he says the trills should hinder the adding of a or the slurs should hinder the adding of a trill. You know, you can say, ask why or how, and this is like that. That's like as if you were with him and you had follow-up questions. He's answering those follow-up questions. So if I were to say the trill is the death of any slur, I'd wonder how off the mark I'd be. Okay, I'll leave it at that for today, and I'll pick up where I left off in the next video. Thanks.